everybody, my name is Hope and welcome back to my channel. I like musicals, they're a part of my life, and today I'm going to give you some more of the biggest Broadway flops. Now I did make a little video about this almost a year ago now, which is kind of crazy, and I'll leave that up in this corner, and I really hope I'm pointing to the right corner. But yes, today I'm going to be talking about some of the biggest Broadway flops because it actually happens more than you think. And some of the biggest shows ever were actually flops in their original run and then somehow turned itself around 10 years later, which honestly, I just kind of think is the magic of theatre. But before I get into the video, remember that you can like, comment, subscribe, do all of that fun stuff. And you can also follow me on my social medias, which is Hope Wilson E on TikTok and on Instagram. And you can also get me on Twitter, which is Hope Wilson 45. But yes, without further ado, let's get into it. So the first musical I'm going to be talking about is King Kong. Now, King Kong came out in 2013 and actually originally started in Melbourne, Australia. I'm pretty sure the way that it worked is they basically built the giant puppet first and then kind of built the show around that. King Kong, I think, definitely didn't have an issue with marketing and publicity. I feel like when King Kong was on, all I remember seeing was that giant puppet. And fair enough, it was a very impressive puppet that did end up winning a Tony. But when it started in Australia, it had a book by Craig Lucas, music by Marius de Vries, I hope I'm pronouncing that right, and lyrics by Michael and Lucas Mitnick. This show was very well regarded in Melbourne and was extremely popular and clearly must have done well for itself because anything that requires multiple people handling a puppet is probably going to be generally more expensive than your average show. But you're probably here like, this is about flops. What are you talking about? Well, when the production in Melbourne did so well, the plan was to bring it to Broadway. Yet, despite the success of the Australian production, they basically decided to overhaul the whole show, rewriting a whole new book and a whole new score, which did have some of the previous material surviving, but definitely not enough for you to be able to call it the same show. With Jack Thorne, the author of Harry Potter and the Cursed Child book, taking on the book writing, and Eddie Perfect taking on the music. And essentially what happened was when the show came out on Broadway, everyone had the same opinions. The King Kong puppet was extremely impressive, but the musical was not. And bear in mind, this is over 5 years later, in 2018, when the show actually ended up making its way to Broadway. It initially did very well at the box office, but after an initial surge, it died down. And after 324 performances, so less than a year of runs, the show closed, costing investors over $30 million. The next one is Big, the musical. As it is for any adaptation, it's always hit or miss on whether an adaptation is successful. The show cost around $10 million to even make it to Broadway, and despite its very well-regarded creative team, the overall reviews were not well received. But honestly, its biggest impact was the fact that Julie Andrews, obviously stan Julie Andrews, was making her shock comeback in Victor Victoria at exactly the same time. So obviously all the publicity was going towards that. And if people weren't going to see Julie Andrews, they were going to see shows like Rent and Bring the Noise, Bring the Funk, which were also on at the same time and were vastly popular. But the show received no Tony wins and therefore closed just 6 months after it opened, meaning a heavy, heavy loss for investors. However, later on, the show did end up getting rewritten and now is much more popular. It went on a UK tour and it's now done quite a bit in new theatres too. So it's not all bad for Big the musical. Next is Chess. Now, I'm not gonna lie, I didn't think chess was about actual chess. I thought it was a figure of speech because I didn't know the musical too well. But as we've learned, just because a musical is popular in one area of the world, it doesn't mean that it will transfer and have the same reception. And Chess was no exception to that rule. It's essentially like a love story mixed with an international chess championship because that somehow works for a musical. And Tim Rice, as well as the two male members of ABBA, wrote the music for the show. Chess was first recorded as a concept album and therefore was never really made to have a plot in mind. And I find with these kinds of musicals, these are the most polarizing in whether they are well received or not. But despite its popular run in the UK, it did not have the same reception in New York. And because of that, it was brought into a complete overhaul, rewriting the script and the score, and basically turning it into a whole new show. And after 98 performances, the show closed on Broadway. Although I don't know if you can really say this is a flop, because yes, while it did flop on Broadway, this musical is still immensely popular across regional theatres and just in general. I feel like this is a well-regarded show. So can you really call it a flop? I don't know. What do you think? Okay, the next one I'm also reluctant to talk about because I don't know if I would really class it as a flop, and that is SpongeBob the musical. SpongeBob was Nickelodeon's attempt in recreating the mastery and popularity of Disney releases such as The Lion King and Beauty and the Beast. So when the musical was adapted for stage, they wanted to do everything they can to keep it popular. And one of those things was having a handful of famous songwriters to write music for the show. And even though the show premiered in Chicago and had pretty positive reviews, the show closed after 327 performances on Broadway. And for any show that's kind of expensive to run, which are typically shows which have more excessive tech elements normally, in under a year you are not recouping your losses unless you are an insanely popular show. And therefore, SpongeBob did not recoup its £18 million budget. And if you want a little bit of reference to like how expensive a show is to run, Back to the Future reportedly cost around $1 million a week to run. $1 million a week. So not only do you have to make that up in ticket sales and merch, but you also have all your tech crew to pay. So it can get very expensive. And so if you don't sell well, it can be basically astronomical losses for the producers and the investors of the show. But like I said at the beginning, with SpongeBob SquarePants, I don't really know if you can class it as a flop because it was on Broadway and a lot of people say it closed due to the refurbishment of the theatre, but there was never any real confirmation of that. But the show's been on an American tour, it's been on a UK tour, the Pro Shot was released. Like, I feel like it's had definitely at least notoriety despite its not absolute success on Broadway. And the last one is Groundhog Day. Groundhog Day came out in 2017, and again, another adaptation which, you know, like I said before, is really hit or miss in success. Now, I felt like this was something I had to bring up because anytime I see anything Stephen Sondheim related, I have to bring it up. But Stephen Sondheim said he would have loved to create a Groundhog Day themed musical, and all I have to say is I think he would have done a brilliant job because I think it just makes a lot of sense for him. But alas, he did not, and Tim Minchin, who wrote Matilda, decided to take a go at it. Now, I didn't realise the show actually initially premiered in London. It premiered at the Old Vic, which I don't think classes as a West End theatre, but it's like an off-West End theatre at least. I'm not really sure what it classes as, but it started there and received very good reviews, and it actually ended up coming back. I want to say like last year or the year before for a short run too, with Andy Cole in it, who played Bill Murray's character. But instead of the Bristol Old Vic production moving to a West End theatre, it decided to move to Broadway instead. Now, there was a handful of problems in regard to production and injuries and things like that, and all the reviews it got were positive. It just didn't seem to sell in the way that it should. And so after only 176 performances, the show closed. And I think Groundhog Day is really the example of anything can fail and anything can succeed. I don't think there's ever really any understanding as to why a show is successful and a show that's almost the same is not. I think a lot of the musicals on this list definitely have reasons as to why they weren't as successful. SpongeBob was expensive. King Kong's, it was seen as the only redeeming factor of King Kong was its gorilla. Is it a gorilla? I'm actually doubting myself now. And things like Chess and Big just never really found their audience. But Groundhog Day was never really one to explain it. People enjoyed it. It just never sold, which I think is honestly the most baffling thing of all. But those were 5 Broadway flops. I think Broadway flops are always interesting because I feel like at some point in time, they always end up coming back around and resurging in popularity. But what do you think about this list? Do you think it's a good list? Do you think it's a bad list? Are there any musicals that you love that were Broadway flops or that you don't think deserve to be Broadway flops? Let me know down in the comments. But, you know, if you don't do that, remember you can like and subscribe and do all that fun stuff. Keep enjoying musicals as much as me, and I will see you in the next one.